Intermission 2, a short transgression into the production of Shuffle. So then, let's talk about Rin, about how he responds to what we just discussed, and about his detrimental extremist altruism, including his backstory with Kaide, as well as how his kindness hurts those around him like Primula. But first, let's take a quick moment to cool off and give credit to those who made all these impressive camera angles and frames of animation work in the first place. Well, that's what I would to say, but like so many lesser known anime in the West, it can be quite difficult to actually find much in the way of information on the legions of animators, script editors, background designers, and so on that work on these classic shows. As such, in an effort not to simply recite the trivia I did find on Google search, I'll refrain from being too elaborate on the subject. However, as context is important, let's take a little look at what I did find. First off, we have the show's director, Naoto Hoshida, who directed the majority of the episodes. It's also worth noting some of the show's episodes are directed partially, directed by others, which is an element of what gives the show its alternative styles. Aside from which, he's probably best known as the key animator, or oftentimes storyboarder on shows such as Hinamatsuri and Nagase Aratero, as well as often being a guest director for single episodes, notably the brilliant episode 15 of Gurren Lagann. His best known work here in the West is probably his role as the rector on Mirai Nikki, The Future Diary, and The Devil is a Part-Timer. The Devil is a Part-Timer is another favourite of mine that's seen something of a resurgence in popularity recently, and has even had a Series 2 confirmed, some 5+ years after its initial release. It's clear to see Naoto's influence on its production, and deserving of an essay or review in its own right, but to come back to the other example, we have Mirai Nikki. As a show that one is far more maligned than contentious, and for good reason. I found it to be a show for binge-watchable consumption, but to lack in great many areas of its narrative, with a lack of compelling characters. However, its directing was something I noted as quite strong during my watch of the show. As such, it was a pleasant surprise to learn it shared Shuffle's director, with some rather famous shots from the show showing his stylings. For example, Yuno is often framed with a form of shaky cam during action scenes, and the rather infamous meme of her decapitating a girl as she runs down a hillside is highly indicative of Hoshida's style of setting a camera at a stationary angle and doing an action shot in as few clips as possible. Something I can appreciate as being almost Western and in its stylings, and he's got a clear flair for using live-action filming techniques in anime productions. Takayama Kashuko handled the show's scripts. He also worked on adapting Mirai Nikki, and generally his role in most productions is adaptation. He has in this role worked on a number of more unsavoury exhibits. However, to give credit where it's due, I think he has a good sense for the pacing of a story, rarely letting them drag but always allowing for slower moments in the dialogue. Apart from Shuffle, there is nothing of Rio note on the resume, with the top contenders on Mal alone being him, or labelling him a living meme for his work on Big Order, Al Noah Zero, and even Boku no Pico, to which I'd agree. Shuffle seems to be the best work I've seen from him. However, I'd be happy to see more of him on less subpar shows. As for the screenplay, we have Kamitsu Hasegawa, who again isn't all that public a person despite a large body of work. His portfolio is varied, ranging from classic oldies like Blue Gender and Slayers, to a lot of kids-orientated stuff like Beyblades. I'm not familiar enough with his work to pass much comment, however I am a big fan of what I have seen of Slayers. As I've already mentioned the dub and its actors a few times, I should also give due attention to Todd Habakon, who is mostly known for his work as a solid voice actor in his own right, but on this occasion, amongst a few others, acted as the main ADR director, primarily between episodes 9 to 24. As I've already stated, I think Shuffle's deb is exemplary, and I really wish more recent Funimation dubs were of this standard. His most notable role is generally that of Natsu, the lead part in the anime fairy tale, and much like his voice acting, I think I've made it clear I enjoy his directing on Shuffle, which was coincidentally one of the first times he acted as lead ADR director, according to his IBM page. I've lamented how more modern ADR directors and script adapters for shows like Horimiya have a tendency to go for what's trendy, or in the case of the Evangelion, dub change what isn't broken and become overly literal to the point of rigidity. With some others like the Dragon Maid and Prison School dubs even having political agenda-fueled lines included. But in Todd's case, he does a wonderful job of directing, and brings a breath of fresh air with his style that I really would love to see more often. Of course, none of these individuals would have had anything to work on without the original source material, which, as already mentioned throughout our essay, is a visual novel of the same name from Studio Naval. For those who've been around the anime community for a bit, you'll already know that in the 2000s there was a spate of visual novel adaptations that made it big, with the obvious one being Clannad and its sequel After Story. As I've already mentioned, Shuffle was one of these said adaptations, and part of what I think makes it and most VN anime great is the fact these games being adapted are complete. A factor I think we're now missing in the modern anime scene is single series completed anime. I spoke on this in my Rent-A-Girlfriend review, but it pains me to see rom-coms and harems dragged into multiple series romps more than ever before. Not that it hasn't always been an issue. The great thing about VNs is they're already complete upon release. This definitely allows anime studios to pick the best bits of these enchanting experiences and turn them into compelling and, importantly, complete productions, which is an important detail as we near the end of our Shuffle analysis, as it's an anime that's not afraid to make decisions and develop its characters. Character focus. Rin. Rin Tsuchimi is, if not my favourite, a high-standing contender for my most loved harem rom-com protagonist. But not because I even like him all that much. He doesn't have the charm of Canon Clannad or Grizzy as witty protags, nor is he an endearingly tragic as Full Metal Panic Sosuke, or as honest as the familiar of Zero Saito. No, instead he's kind of an asshole. To dive into Rin's character, we need to look at a few elements that thankfully we've already discussed to some degree. First, Rin is altruistic to an absurd degree, which isn't an unusual trait for his type of protagonist, however is used to form integral details of his character, and informed by somewhat logical backstory. Another large part we'll hone in on is his expectations of those around him. As said at length, Shuffle isn't as critical of its genre as the likes of School Days or ReZero are, but it does share some teaming with those two, that of the pressures put on young men in culture. Rin is expected to be the man of the house. He's expected to make judgment calls when Primula gets sick, and he's hoisted with the decision to become either king of the gods or demons as early as episode 1. It's a lot of pressure for a kid. As for his actual arc throughout the show, we've already seen how much of what Rin needs to deal with is his own indecisiveness. And what he perceives as kindness often leads to greater pain for those around him in the long run. What tied closest to this theme listed above is Rin's inability to constantly go with popular opinion. He trusts the kings in the Primula arc. He tries to sacrifice himself to buy Sia time in the beach episode, and he ignores Asa's feelings on their first date. But maybe the most lasting impact of any of these acts is the one we just spoke on, becoming Kaide's reason to live. Something I love about how Rin pretends to be the reason for the death of Kaide's mother is how, while it seems selfless, and definitely is to an extent, in reality all Rin is doing is once more what he was told to do by none other than Kaide's mother. Can I ask you to look after Kaide for me while I'm gone, Rin? Short, offhanded question from Miss Furo changes the course of Rin and Kaide's lives indefinitely, and is the earliest example we know of towards Rin's nature. On the one hand, you can argue what he did was right. He saved Kaide in a sense. But much like sending Primula away was right, Rin's motive for doing it in some way, however small, down to the fact he no longer wished to be lonely. Looking upon the flashback scenes with this mindset adds a whole other layer to them, as young Rin keeping the photo hidden and being both physically and emotionally abused is all based on what he perceives as the right thing to do. For me, what makes his character writing so strong is how it's involved in everything he does. We've already mentioned the prime examples of tedium, but this cohesion is what makes his character a compelling story to follow. He doesn't solely save Primula or Sia, Licorice and Kikyo do the bulk of that. He's a flawed human being, simply trying to do what seems best for what he considers to be selfless reasons, but in some sense aren't. Adding to these show's running theme of questioning the morality of harem fantasies, even acts we at first perceive as just get turned on their head. For example, Rin acts like the normal harem protagonist, however he isn't nearly as dense. He's fully aware of the girl's feelings towards him, and the sometimes sexual nature of those, but refrains from picking any of them to save their feelings. But is that really the reason? As Itsuki kindly points out early on, isn't Rin just preventing the inevitable of making the difficult judgment call, and making it hard on all of them by leading them on? We talked before about bedrooms, and one of the interesting things about Rin's is his boat hobby. We already mentioned the traditionalist aspect of Kaide and her house, as well as the game of Pong and the clothing her and Primula, post-episode 15, wear. This seems to stretch further even into Rin's room. For a boy his age, the boat is the dominant feature of his bedroom. It's indicative of someone who wants a quiet life, a simple, low-stress hobby. A hobby where he's totally in control, were it a sport, he'd have to worry about letting his teammates down, for example. But a model boat is quiet. It's rewarding in that it marks progression without any negative side effects. The boat is a great representation, not only for the passage of time within the show, but also for Rin. There's no scenes where the girls find porno mags in his room, nor do we ever see him with his computer. Rin is inverted and highly unsuited to being man of the house, or in a position to be chased by 4 women. He is literally too considerate to be unaware of the girls' advances on him, and in that sense, he really isn't dense enough to be a stereotypical harem protagonist. Some interesting stuff to keep in mind as we move forward. He is essentially a real kid, an introverted one, who just wants a quiet life, put into the position of the harem protagonist by some malicious author somewhere. Rin takes in Primula in episode 2, a seemingly harem-y trope of little significance. But in truth, he does so because they expect him to, and the result is him neglecting the girl even after episode 15. He doesn't pick any of the girls because life seems easier for everyone if he keeps perpetuating the harem. He doesn't want to face the consequences of breaking their hearts, or at least hurting their feelings. The fact is, selfish or not, Rin is just too young to be making all these decisions, and I think that's the point of his character. The show is trying to talk to its primary young male audience. It sympathises with the struggles of being adolescent, and of having society, family and friends expect so much of you, expecting you to make so many big decisions. However, it isn't solely content to be kind. Like how Asa at first talks through in episode 13. In episode 18, she slapped doing much the same thing with its audience time and time again. Episode 15 is a triumph because Rin helps put things right, but in a sense he does so, and his resolves for it comes from Asa telling him what to do. The show is literally saying its audience, male or female, not just to listen to it, but to take what it says seriously and to come up with your own answers. That's why Asa slaps him in episode 18. It's why that slap is so damn important. That's why the scene we'll next discuss over the course of the remaining 4 episodes are such a fitting conclusion to Rin's arc. Like all the characters, his development is an instant. He trips, hurts Primula and Narune, but then gets picked up by those around him, namely Asa. Then he trips again, failing to actually be there for Sia, but improving a little by turning her down. Then he takes a step back into his old ways, acknowledging Asa's feelings and his own, but still going on a pre-planned date with her. And this is where the show slaps him. Asa hits Rin at the crucial moment because in real life, we don't all magically do a personality 180 after a traumatic or impactful event. We stumble, struggle to learn from our past, and end up making future mistakes. This is the point of Rin. Only after this does he start to change, but even now he isn't done developing. As we discussed, he shows no consideration for Kaide throughout this arc, pushing her further and further away, while all the while neglecting Primula, despite the fact he himself parallels her suffering of childhood neglect. It's the abused becoming an abuser. With the end of the Kaide arc and the events of the Asa arc, as we will talk about shortly, we see Rin finally learn to move on from his previous fuck-ups. He realises he needs to give Kaide space and a push to be her own person. He knows he can't be Primula's father figure, and acts truly unselfishly to save Asa when she suddenly becomes too stubborn for her own good. In the final act, Rin becomes a man, not the public toxic perception of one, but the sort he needed to be all along, the type who's there for and supports the people in his life, not because he's told to do so, or because it's right, but because it's what he thinks is best, and what he wants to do. And I think that's a damn good message to convey to your lead character in a fucking harem anime. It's true, Rin, that I think you see most clearly why I both love Shuffle and why it's so great in the first place. Shuffle to me is like Neon Genesis Ava is to End of Ava, like Miracle Girl Nanaha is to Madoka Magica, and like Gurren Lagann is to every other guy next in Trigger show ever made. It's got all the teaming and self-critical writing of a deconstruction, all the depth and brilliant character scripting to be a hate-filled attack on the genre it portrays, and the fans of said tropes. And that wouldn't necessarily even be a bad thing, but I love the subtlety it goes for instead. I love how it can be enjoyed as nothing more than a really well done and produced high school fantasy anime romp. But that the more you dig into it, the more you're going to get out of it. I love how Rin is both used to criticise the show's own fan base, but done so in a constructive way. It doesn't end with Rin being killed by a full-blown Kaide or Yandere Kaide. And while that could make for a great story in its own right, it wouldn't make for a constructive one, only a cautionary tale. Shuffle therefore instead opts to present its young audience with some vague semblance of alternate ideas for how to live life, rather than just being another said cautionary tale against otaku culture and lifestyle. Thanks for watching or listening. That's the end of this part. Feel free to leave a like below, and remember you can always check out the typed and majoritively better version of this on Mal. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.